Have you ever stopped to think about why, even when surrounded by people, you still feel out of place? Why that feeling of not belonging never completely disappears, no matter how many times you try to fit in? Maybe you've started to notice that there's something fundamentally different between you and most of the people around you. And what if I told you that this feeling isn't a flaw of yours, but rather the natural result of having woken up to a reality that the crowd prefers to ignore? Alan Watts, a philosopher who dedicated his life to unraveling the patterns of human consciousness, had a powerful perspective on this. Some people simply aren't made to be part of the masses, and trying to force that fit is denying your very essence. Modern society sells a seductive idea of normality. There's a pre-established script that everyone should follow. Study at the right schools, land a stable job, build a family in traditional molds, accumulate material possessions, and seek constant social approval. This model is presented as the natural path of life, as if there were only one correct way to exist. But here's the problem. This normality is a collective fabrication, a statistical average that doesn't truly represent anyone. It's like trying to fit real people into generic molds, completely ignoring the uniqueness of each individual journey. Alan Watts saw this with crystal clarity. He understood that the desperate quest to fit into this artificial standard was a psychological trap that distanced people from their true nature. The more you try to be normal according to external standards, the more you distance yourself from who you really are inside. The normality sold by society is a comfortable illusion that keeps people trapped in roles that were never made for them. There's a moment in certain people's lives when something changes irreversibly. It could be an existential crisis, a significant loss, or simply the gradual accumulation of observations about life. Suddenly, you start questioning things you used to accept without thinking. Why do I work so hard for things that don't make me happy? Why do I follow rules I never consciously chose? Why do the people around me seem so satisfied with superficial answers? This awakening, this process of deep self-knowledge, naturally creates a distance between you and most people. It's not something you deliberately choose, but rather an inevitable consequence of seeing beyond appearances. The more you understand about social conditioning, repetitive patterns of behavior, and the collective illusions that keep society functioning, the less you can identify with the automatic way the masses live. You start noticing the invisible strings that manipulate people's choices, the ready-made narratives they repeat without examining, the manufactured fears that keep them obedient. And once you see these structures clearly, there's no way to pretend you don't see them. This separation isn't arrogance or superiority, as some might interpret it. It's simply growing lucidity. It's the natural result of waking up in a world where most people are still asleep. Alan Watts used to say that enlightenment doesn't make you better than others, just more aware of the illusions everyone shares. And this awareness, however valuable it may be, has an inevitable social price. Most people live on autopilot. They wake up, follow established routines, react to situations in predictable ways, and repeat behavioral patterns they inherited without questioning. They consume the same news, share the same opinions they heard on television, follow fashion and behavior trends dictated by algorithms and marketers. There's no deep reflection, no pause to examine whether these choices really make sense for them. There's only the mechanical repetition of pre-programmed social scripts. It's like watching people run software that was installed in their minds during childhood, never questioning whether these programs are still useful or were ever truly chosen by them. When you wake up from this automatic mode, when you start observing your own thinking and others' behavior with critical distance, something fundamental changes. You notice the mechanical functioning of social interactions. You see how conversations follow predictable patterns, how people repeat canned phrases, how they react defensively to any idea that challenges their established beliefs. And once you notice this, you can no longer participate in this mechanical functioning with the same naivety as before. It's like watching a movie for the second time. You already know all the tricks. You already know where the editing cuts are. You already anticipate the plot twists. The magic of the first experience is gone forever. In everyday relationships, this means you find yourself observing superficial conversations with a mixture of compassion and strangeness, wondering how people can take such evidently empty things so seriously. Alan Watts had a powerful metaphor for social life. He saw it as a grand theater where everyone is playing roles. the successful executive who radiates confidence in meetings, the devoted mother who sacrifices everything for her children, the intellectual who flaunts knowledge in conversation circles, the rebel who performs non-conformism within acceptable patterns of rebellion. These are all social roles, masks that people wear to navigate the world. And here's the crucial detail. Most people completely identify with these masks. They believe they are the roles they play. The executive really believes he is that image of success. The devoted mother really believes her identity is reduced to that role. But more conscious people see these masks with disturbing clarity. They see the performance, notice the constant effort to maintain the facade, notice the moments when the mask slips and reveals the insecurity underneath. And once you see this, you feel an immense difficulty in performing your own social roles with sincerity. How do you pretend interest in a conversation about corporate promotions when you clearly see that everyone is just playing the role of ambitious professional? How do you participate in family gatherings where everyone pretends to be idealized versions of themselves? This insight creates a constant sense of displacement in environments where everyone is committed to their performances. You become the only actor on stage who's aware it's just a play, while everyone else believes the play is reality. If you're enjoying this content, you might also like our exclusive material that's in the first pinned comment. Developing an observing perspective of reality inevitably creates a profound existential loneliness. When you can position yourself as a witness to your own thoughts and the social dynamics around you, when you learn to see the patterns that repeat, the collective illusions that sustain entire institutions, you automatically place yourself outside the game. It's like climbing a mountain and observing the city down below. You gain perspective, but also distance. You see people's movement like ants following invisible trails. You notice the cycles that repeat. You identify the structures that organize the apparent chaos. But this panoramic view has an emotional cost. You're no longer immersed in the immediate experience like others are. You can't completely lose yourself in everyday concerns because part of you is always observing from outside, noticing the transitory and often absurd nature of these concerns. Alan Watts spoke about this observer's loneliness with admirable honesty. He didn't romanticize spiritual awakening as something that makes life easier or happier in the conventional sense. He acknowledged that expanded consciousness comes accompanied by isolation, because you literally start inhabiting a different reality from most people. It's not that you're better or worse, just different. It's like speaking a language that very few people understand. You can be physically present anywhere, but existentially, you're always a bit separate, observing more than fully participating. And this loneliness isn't necessarily negative, although it can be painful. It's simply the natural price of expanded consciousness, the cost of seeing beyond appearances. Superficial conversations become progressively unbearable. At first, you can still participate in them with some effort. You smile at the appropriate places, make generic comments, demonstrate polite interest. But internally, you feel a growing boredom, a sense of wasting time and vital energy. When you've already experienced deep conversations about the meaning of existence, about the nature of consciousness, about the patterns that shape entire societies, it's extremely difficult to return to discussions about celebrity gossip, about which car brand is better, about the latest fashion trends, or about the trivial dramas of others' daily lives. It's not superiority, although it may be interpreted that way by those who don't understand. It's simply frequency incompatibility. It's like trying to listen to an AM radio station when you've already discovered FM quality. You can technically pick up the signal, but the static is too irritating to ignore. Topics that once seemed important now reveal their essential emptiness. Discussions about physical appearances, about accumulating material goods, about small social competitions for status, all of this seems absurdly insignificant when you're internally dealing with fundamental existential questions. Why are we here? What really matters at the end of life? How can we live authentically in a world of masks? These are the questions occupying your mind, and it's almost impossible to feign enthusiasm for conversations that consciously avoid any depth. The inevitable result is a natural distancing from conventional social circles. You stop frequenting certain environments, avoid certain people, create excuses not to participate in social events you once considered mandatory. It's not antipathy or deliberate rejection of others, it's just self-preservation. Protecting your energy from interactions that drain without nourishing. Society exerts an invisible but extremely powerful pressure for everyone to conform. This pressure doesn't necessarily come from explicit authorities or formal laws, but from 1,000 small social mechanisms that punish deviation from the norm. Looks of disapproval when you express an opinion outside the standard. Gradual exclusion from groups when you don't share collective interests. Passive-aggressive comments disguised as concern. Veiled judgments about your life choices. And perhaps the most insidious of all, the internal self-demand you develop after years of being conditioned to value external approval. You start policing yourself, censoring your own thoughts, doubting your perceptions when they differ from the collective consensus. Am I the one who's wrong? Maybe I should try harder to be like others. Who am I to question what everyone accepts? This pressure to fit in is especially strong in cultures where conformity is valued as a social virtue. Thinking differently is seen as arrogance. Questioning traditions is interpreted as disrespect. Seeking your own path is considered selfishness. Alan Watts deeply understood these social control mechanisms. He saw how entire societies are built on the fear of being different, on the need for group approval, on the illusion of security that comes from following the herd. And he argued that resisting this pressure, staying true to your own perception even when it diverges from the crowd, is an act of tremendous courage and radical authenticity. It's not adolescent rebellion or gratuitous contrarianism. It's simply refusing to betray yourself in exchange for temporary social acceptance. Awakened people notice something disturbing about the goals that society sells as success. That big house in the right neighborhood, that luxury car, that prestigious corporate position, that robust bank account, that approval from the right people. The masses pursue these achievements with fanatical dedication, sacrificing health, relationships, and inner peace in the race for these symbolic trophies. But when you observe carefully, you notice a disturbing pattern. People who achieve this conventional success often seem empty inside. There's a desperate urgency in their lives, a constant need for more, a chronic dissatisfaction disguised as ambition. They achieve one goal and immediately need the next one to fill the void that the previous achievement didn't fill. It's a race with no finish line, a quest that never ends because it's based on a false premise, the idea that happiness and meaning come from outside, from external achievements and validation from others. Alan Watts pointed directly at this trap. He saw how the entire social system is built to keep people chasing carrots that always recede when you approach them. Work hard now to be happy later. Sacrifice the present for an idealized future that never actually arrives. And when you really understand this, when you see with clarity the existential emptiness hiding behind conventional success, it becomes impossible to pursue these goals with the same motivation that moves the crowd. You simply can no longer believe the narrative. You can no longer pretend that that next car, that next promotion, that next material achievement will finally bring the fulfillment that all previous achievements failed to provide. And this isn't failure or lack of ambition. It's clarity about what really matters, about where genuine human satisfaction truly resides. The perception of time changes radically when you wake up. Alan Watts had profound insights about how time is fundamentally a mental construction, not an absolute objective reality. The past exists only as memory in the present. The future exists only as imagination in the present. The only moment that really exists is this now, this eternal instant that's always happening. But entire society is organized around denying this present. Everything is about planning the future, preparing for eventualities, following rigid schedules, meeting artificial deadlines. People live according to 5-year goals, decades-long career plans, retirements that will come in 30 years. They postpone real life for a hypothetical future that never actually materializes, because when that future finally arrives, it's also present, and the mind is already projected into the next future. It's a perpetual escape from the only time that exists. When you understand this deeply, when you really grasp the nature of the present, you develop a very different relationship with social urgencies, career plans, and temporal expectations. That pressure to reach certain milestones at specific ages loses all meaning. That anxiety about falling behind peers disappears. That need to follow arbitrary timelines imposed by others evaporates. You start living more organically, responding to what life presents in the present moment, instead of forcing reality to conform to pre-established scripts. But this fundamental difference in temporal perception creates even more distance from the masses. People don't understand why you're not desperate about deadlines they consider urgent. They don't understand your lack of concern with temporal milestones they see as essential. They interpret your presence in the now as irresponsibility or lack of ambition, when in reality, it's just a deeper understanding about the nature of time and existence. Awakening inevitably leads to questioning authorities that most people accept without reflection. Institutions that promise security. Experts who claim certainties. Traditions that demand obedience. Authority figures who demand automatic respect. The masses tend to trust these structures without examining them critically. If a doctor says something, it must be true. If it's in the law, it must be just. If it's always been done this way, it must be right. If a respected figure defends a certain position, it must be valid. There's a comfortable intellectual conformism in delegating critical thinking to external authorities. You don't need to make an effort to form your own opinions if you can simply adopt the opinions of the right people. But when you start genuinely thinking for yourself, when you develop the ability to examine ideas independently of who presents them, when you learn to question premises that everyone accepts as obvious, you inevitably come into conflict with these established authorities. You realize that doctors also make mistakes, that laws often reflect power interests more than justice, that traditions often perpetuate historical oppressions, that respected figures can be completely wrong about important topics. Alan Watts was a master at this. He questioned religious, scientific, philosophical, and social authorities with equal vigor, always returning to direct experience and independent thinking as the true criterion of truth. And this critical stance, this refusal to blindly accept what authorities declare, inevitably puts you in conflict with conformist mentalities. People interpret your questioning as gratuitous rebellion, disrespect, or arrogance, when in reality it's simply the exercise of critical intelligence that everyone should practice but few actually do. Being genuinely yourself has a real and inevitable social price. When you stop performing expected roles, when you stop pretending to have opinions you don't have, when you stop hiding aspects of yourself that others might judge, when you simply live according to your inner truth even though it's socially inconvenient, you will be misunderstood. You'll be judged. You'll be, in many cases, rejected by groups that expected you to conform. Old friendships can dissolve when you stop being the person they knew. Family members may express disappointment with your unconventional choices. Work colleagues may marginalize you when you don't participate in corporate political games. This rejection hurts. There's no romanticizing it. We're social beings, and exclusion triggers literal pain centers in the brain. But Alan Watts defended radical authenticity even in the face of this price, because he understood something fundamental. Living a lie to be accepted is infinitely more painful than facing the temporary loneliness that comes from being genuine. When you're constantly performing a false version of yourself, there's an inner exhaustion that never ends. You're always alert, always measuring your words, always calculating how you'll be perceived, always betraying some aspect of who you really are. This internal betrayal accumulates a devastating psychological weight over time. Depression, anxiety, a sense of existential emptiness. All of this often has its roots in this disconnection between who you are and who you pretend to be. So when you finally choose authenticity, even though it costs superficial relationships, there's a profound liberation. You can finally breathe. And here's the truth few people realize. Truly authentic people attract truly authentic connections. They may be rare, these genuine connections, but a single deep friendship based on mutual truth is worth more than dozens of superficial relationships based on masks. Social life often functions as an elaborate game. A game of appearances where everyone pretends to be more successful, happier, more confident than they really are. A game of veiled competition where friends secretly compete for social status, professional achievements, and validation from others. A game of mutual validation where people compliment each other superficially, hoping to receive compliments in return. A game where nobody really says what they think, where conversations are choreographed according to unwritten rules of social etiquette, where authenticity is sacrificed in favor of maintaining superficial peace. Most people play this game with total seriousness. They really believe it matters who has more likes on social media, who has the prettiest house, who travels to more exotic destinations, who knows the most influential people. They invest tremendous energy in managing their public images, in discreetly competing with acquaintances, in accumulating status symbols that impress other players. But when you wake up, when you see the game for what it really is, you completely lose the ability and interest to play it seriously. It's like discovering that the board game everyone takes so seriously has completely arbitrary rules. Why should you care about winning a game whose rules don't make sense and whose prizes are illusory? So you leave the game. Not deliberately, not as a dramatic statement, but simply because you can no longer pretend it matters. You stop competing for social validation. You stop managing your public image. You stop participating in the elaborate social dances that once seemed important. And this exit from the game is interpreted by other players as something very strange. They don't understand why you don't care about things everyone cares about. They interpret your indifference as arrogance, as if you considered yourself too superior to play. But it's not superiority, it's just honesty. You simply can no longer pretend that game has real meaning. While most people seek comfort, constant entertainment, and distraction from any internal discomfort, more conscious people seek meaning, purpose, and truth even when these are painful. These are fundamentally different life orientations. The masses want to be entertained, want to forget their problems, want to anesthetize any existential anxiety with consumption, fun, and constant stimuli. They spend hours on social media scrolling infinite feeds. They binge-watch series to avoid silence. They fill every free moment with noise and activity to not have to face uncomfortable thoughts. They seek relationships that are comfortable and easy, not challenging and transformative. They choose careers based on financial security, not alignment with purpose. Their entire life is organized around minimizing discomfort and maximizing superficial pleasure. But the search for meaning goes exactly in the opposite direction. It means being willing to face uncomfortable truths about yourself. It means questioning comfortable beliefs you've carried for decades. It means sitting in silence with your own mind even when it's chaotic. It means choosing growth over comfort, authenticity over acceptance, truth over convenience. Alan Watts often differentiated between pleasure and joy. Pleasure comes from external stimuli and is always temporary, always needs to be renewed. Joy comes from internal alignment and has a more lasting and profound quality. The masses seek constant pleasure. Awakened people seek meaningful joy. These pursuits create completely incompatible inner worlds. You can't really connect with someone who's constantly fleeing to distractions when you're seeking depth. You can't share values with someone who measures success in terms of material comfort when you measure it in terms of inner growth. These fundamental differences in orientation make it difficult, sometimes impossible, to maintain close relationships with people who are firmly stuck in comfort-seeking mode. Social conventions, etiquette rules, professional hierarchies, cultural rituals, all begin to seem arbitrary and even absurd when you observe them with enough critical distance. Why exactly should we dress in certain ways in certain environments? Who decided that this clothing combination is appropriate and that one isn't? Why are certain words considered offensive while their synonyms are acceptable? Why should corporate hierarchies be respected even when people in positions of power are clearly incompetent? Why are certain social rituals mandatory even when nobody really enjoys them? When you really examine these structures, you realize they're completely arbitrary. Human creations. There's nothing natural or inevitable about them. They're just collective agreements that solidified over time and are now treated as immutable laws of nature. Alan Watts loved pointing out the absurdity of these conventions. He saw how people took extremely seriously rules that were fundamentally invented games. And once you see this, once you recognize that these structures are temporary and arbitrary, not absolute truths, it becomes extremely difficult to participate in them with enthusiasm. You go to mandatory corporate parties but can't pretend you care about the empty conversations. You follow etiquette rules when necessary, but internally recognize their absurdity. You respect professional hierarchies out of pragmatism, but don't confer real authority based solely on titles. This perception of the artificiality of social structures isn't cynicism, although it may seem so to those who still believe in these structures as absolute reality. It's simply clarity about the constructed nature of social reality. Modern consumer culture essentially functions as a false religion. It offers a complete system of beliefs, rituals, and promises of salvation. Believe in this product and you'll be happy. Perform this shopping ritual and you'll find satisfaction. Accumulate these possessions and you'll achieve meaning. People follow this religion with fanatical devotion, making pilgrimages to the temples of consumption we call shopping malls, performing online shopping rituals at 3 in the morning, accumulating objects that promise inner transformation but deliver only momentary satisfaction. There's even a sacred hierarchy of brands, where certain objects confer more spiritual status than others. The person who drives the right car, wears the right watch, lives in the right neighborhood is closer to consumerist salvation than someone with inferior possessions. And just like traditional religions, this religion of consumption keeps its devotees trapped through a perpetual promise of future redemption. This product didn't satisfy? The next one certainly will. This purchase didn't bring happiness? The next one certainly will. It's a carrot eternally out of reach, keeping people running on the treadmill of infinite consumption. Awakened people recognize this pattern with painful clarity. They see how advertising manipulates desires, how marketing creates artificial needs, how consumption has become a modern substitute for genuine purpose. And once you see this, you can no longer participate with the same unconscious excitement. You don't feel enthusiasm for product launches. You don't experience that thrill of buying new things. You don't believe that material objects will fill existential voids. And in a society where consuming is almost a civic duty, where the entire economy depends on people buying things they don't need, this refusal to participate in the consumerist religion is seen as extremely strange. People don't understand how you cannot care about having the newest phone, the latest car, the current fashion clothes. They interpret your lack of interest as poverty or failure, when in reality, it's liberation from a system that turns humans into perpetual consumers. There's a particularly disturbing experience of being physically present in the midst of groups, parties, or social gatherings, but feeling a profound existential loneliness. Everyone is talking, laughing, interacting, but you feel completely disconnected. You observe the interactions as if you were behind glass. You hear the conversations, but they sound empty and without substance. You smile at the appropriate moments, but don't feel true joy. It's like being a ghost participating in a party of living people. They're all connected to each other through shared interests, common values, similar concerns. But you no longer share these things. Your interests have deepened to questions they avoid. Your values have changed to things they don't value. Your concerns have expanded to dimensions they don't consider. So you're there, but you're not really present. Alan Watts spoke about this kind of existential loneliness with intimate understanding. He knew that once you experience real depth in conversations, in relationships, in internal reflections, superficiality becomes intolerable. It's like having tasted gourmet food and then having to go back to flavorless industrialized food. It technically nourishes, but doesn't satisfy. These superficial social interactions technically fill time, but don't nourish your soul. And the loneliness that comes from this is especially acute because it's surrounded by people. If you were physically alone, the loneliness would be natural and expected. But being existentially alone while surrounded by people creates a painful cognitive dissonance. You look around and think, why can't I connect? Why doesn't this satisfy me anymore? What's wrong with me? But there's nothing wrong. It's simply that superficial connection doesn't satisfy those who've already experienced depth. It's better to be physically alone and internally at peace with yourself than surrounded by people and existentially empty. Most people are deeply afraid of exactly the things that awakened people actively seek. Fear of silence, because in silence you can hear your own uncomfortable thoughts. Fear of introspection, because looking inward can reveal truths about yourself you'd prefer to ignore. Fear of solitude, because being alone means having no distractions from your own insecurities. Fear of self-knowledge, because knowing yourself deeply means having to take responsibility for your choices and patterns. So the masses organize entirely around avoiding these experiences. They fill every moment with noise, constant companionship, infinite distractions. They never stop, never stay quiet, never look inward. It's a perpetual escape from themselves. But conscious people do exactly the opposite. They seek silence because they know it's in silence that true insights emerge. They practice introspection because they understand that self-knowledge is the path to inner freedom. They choose periods of solitude because they know that being comfortable with yourself is the foundation of any genuine happiness. They're not afraid to face their own shadows because they know that ignoring them doesn't make them disappear. This fundamental difference in orientation, this complete inversion of what's sought versus avoided, creates an abyss of mutual misunderstanding between the masses and those who've awakened. People don't understand why you choose to be alone sometimes. They interpret your silence as depression. They see your introspection as self-centeredness. They confuse your search for self-knowledge with narcissism. But you're not strange for seeking what others avoid. You're just brave enough to face truths that most prefer to hide. There's a fundamental difference in how conscious people and the masses think about time. The masses live for immediate gratification. They want results now, pleasures now, rewards now. They choose the easiest path in the short term, even if it creates problems in the long term. They eat fast food because it's convenient now, ignoring future consequences for health. They accumulate debt to buy things they want today, ignoring the financial weight this will bring tomorrow. They avoid difficult conversations or personal growth because they're uncomfortable in the moment, ignoring how this avoidance accumulates into future suffering. The entire temporal orientation is focused on the immediate present, on the next pleasure, on the next distraction. But conscious people develop a very different temporal perspective. They value experiences and investments that only show value in the long term. They choose inner growth even when it's uncomfortable now, because they know it will bring lasting peace. They cultivate deep relationships that take years to develop, instead of immediate superficial connections. They work on meaningful projects that may not bring reward for years, but will create lasting legacies. The entire temporal orientation is focused on the longer arc of life, on continuous development, on meaning accumulated over decades. Alan Watts talked about this difference between living to consume experiences versus living to cultivate wisdom. Consumption is always about the next moment. Cultivation is always about the continuous process. These different timescales create completely incompatible priorities. You can't share life projects with someone who only thinks about next weekend. You can't build something meaningful with someone who wants immediate return. This fundamental temporal difference makes it difficult to maintain partnerships, business relationships, or even deep friendships with people operating on such distinct temporal frequencies. Society offers various collective comfort mechanisms designed to alleviate existential anxiety without actually solving its deep causes. Mass entertainment that distracts from real concerns. Simplified narratives that explain complex problems with convenient villains and comforting heroes. Social scapegoats that allow channeling personal frustrations toward external targets. Ideological certainties that eliminate the need for critical thinking. Social rituals that create a sense of belonging without requiring real vulnerability. The masses consume these mechanisms voraciously because they work, at least superficially. They work like painkillers work for physical pain. They don't cure the cause, but temporarily dull the symptom. So people watch their favorite TV shows to forget unsatisfying lives. They adopt simplistic political ideologies that explain all problems as the fault of a specific group. They participate in religious or cultural rituals that offer a sense of community without demanding true intimacy. And for a while, these mechanisms provide relief. But those who awaken perceive these mechanisms for what they really are: elaborate escapism. They see how entertainment is designed to keep people passive and consuming. They notice how simplified narratives distort complex realities. They identify how scapegoats serve to divert attention from real structural problems. They recognize how ideological certainties prevent genuine thinking. And once you see these mechanisms consciously, you can no longer find in them the relief they once provided. It's like trying to use a magic trick on yourself after knowing how it works. You see the strings, you know the trick, so the illusion doesn't work anymore. This loss of access to easy collective comfort dramatically intensifies the feeling of non-belonging. Everyone around you is using these mechanisms and finding temporary relief. But you can no longer participate in this collective relief. You need to face naked reality without comforting anesthetics. But here's the final and perhaps most important truth. Consciously accepting that you'll never be part of the crowd is, paradoxically, the path to true inner peace. Spending your entire life trying to fit in where you fundamentally don't belong is the real tragedy, not the non-belonging itself. It's wasting your unique existence trying to be a mediocre copy of what others expect, instead of being the authentic version of yourself. Alan Watts said something profound about this. The more you try to hold water tightly, the more it escapes through your fingers. The more you try to force your fit into the crowd, the more violently you distance yourself from your own essence. But when you finally relax in this attempt, when you accept that your path is different and it's okay for it to be that way, when you stop fighting against your own nature, something magical happens. You find peace in difference. You find freedom in stopping the pretense. You find genuine joy in living according to your truth instead of according to others' expectations. And here's the secret few people realize. This acceptance of non-belonging to the masses doesn't mean perpetual loneliness. It means you stop seeking acceptance in places where it will never come, and open space to find your true tribes. People who have also awakened. People who also see beyond appearances. People who value depth over superficiality, authenticity over performance, truth over comfort. These connections are rare, yes, but a single authentic friendship with someone who really sees you is worth more than 1,000 superficial relationships with people who only know your mask. Accepting non-belonging to the crowd means recognizing that you belong to a different tribe. A tribe of seekers, questioners, conscious observers. And most importantly, it means finally belonging to yourself, living in harmony with your own nature, instead of in constant war trying to be something you're not. This is the true freedom that Alan Watts pointed to. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to be who you really are without apologizing for it. So if you've never felt part of the crowd, if you've always had that sense of displacement, even when surrounded by people, maybe it's not because something's wrong with you. Maybe it's because you woke up in a world where most people are still asleep. And there's no shame in that. There's no defect in that. There's only the reality of a consciousness that has expanded beyond the limits that contain the masses. Accept it, embrace it, and find peace in the truth of who you really are. If this content touched you in any way, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Share your experience in the comments. And remember, you're not alone on this journey, even when it seems like you are.